So, ladies and gentlemen, today we are going to learn how to factor standard form quadratic trinomials when a equals 1. And we're going to learn a long method today, which includes the grouping method, okay? So let's begin by understanding what the heck this title actually means. You want to factor something? That's like doing distributed property backwards, right? And what are we going to be factoring? We're going to be factoring standard form. If you remember it back from previous sections, the vocabulary, a standard form polynomial is when it's written from highest exponent down to the smallest, down to the constant at the very end. So it's going to be in order from highest exponent down to smallest. And we all know the name quadratic trinomial. Quadratic means the highest power of 2, trinomial 3 terms. And it says when a equals 1. So a quadratic trinomial where your a value is 1 would be starting with the x squared because there is no number out here in the front. The leading coefficient is 1. And then you would have something like plus 3x and then plus 2. There's a standard form quadratic trinomial. So we're going to be factoring polynomials that look like this. They have a power of 2 and have specifically three terms. And today our a value is 1, so you're not going to see a number out here in the front. And we're going to learn a long method of factoring. Okay. Then tomorrow I'll show you a shorter method, and you're going to hate me for showing you this long method. But the long method is essential for more complicated problems, so we might as well learn the long method right now. Let's jump right in. Here's our page of notes. So everybody go to this page. And again, we're factoring these type of polynomials, quadratic trinomials, when the a value is 1. Okay, so let's first start by understanding that a, b, and c are just numbers. A, b, and c are just numbers. So this is a number, this is a number, and that's a number. And specifically, it says up here that the a value is 1. Okay, so on today's worksheet, you're not even going to see a 5 right here or a -2. You're not going to see any number because a is 1. Okay, so we're going to focus in on quadratic trinomials that don't even have a number right here. Okay, because that would imply that there's the a value of 1. Anyway, so let's begin by looking at the steps, the long way of factoring quadratic trinomials when your a value is 1. Step 1 is to multiply a times c. And you know what? Instead of reading through all this, let's actually start one of these. Right here it says teacher does it. Okay, and I'm gonna do it. You guys are gonna follow along on your paper. So let's begin by doing step 1. And this is what I recommend. Go to the edge of your paper and actually write down 1 for step 1. And if you read above, step 1 is what? What does it say? It says multiply what? Okay, a times c. So go ahead and write down a times c equals, now remember, a is 1 right here. C is -24. So what is a times c? -24. Just -24. And remember, a, b, and c are just numbers, so don't include the variables, right? So it's just the number 1 times the c value, -24. 1 times -24 is -24. And that is the answer for step 1. And then if we go back up here and read what step 2 is, it says, think of the multiples of that number from step 1 that combine to give you the b value. Tip, make a list. All right, so think of the multiples of this number from step 1 that combine together to give us the b value. And it says make a list. So I would like you guys to, even though you could do this in your head, make a list every time, at least for today's lesson. Step 2, make a list. How could we get -24? So I'm going to start by saying -1 times what will give me 24? Yeah, -1 times 24 will give me -24. How about -2 times what will give me a -24? 12. Okay, how about -3 times what will give me a -24? 8. How about -4 times what gives me a -24? 6. How about -5 times what gives me a -24? It doesn't work, right? And if I went to -6, so I'd already be back to this pair of numbers. So I could just stop right there. That's my list, the list of the multiples of that answer from step 1. And now I need to actually look at each pair of numbers and combine them, and see if it gives me the b value. That's going to be the pair of numbers that I want for step 2. So if I combine -1 and 24, remember combine means adding and subtracting. If I do -1 plus 24, I'll get 23 right here. So if this middle term was a positive 23x, then I would pick these numbers. But it's not a positive 23x, so this is not the pair of numbers that I want. I move on to negative 2 plus 12. What's negative 2 plus 12? What's negative 2 plus 12? 10. Is this 10? Is this a 10x? No, it's not. Pay attention. So we're not using this pair of numbers. How about negative 3 plus 8? What's negative 3 plus 8? 5. Is that a 5 right there, plus 5x? No. How about negative 4 plus 6? That's 2. Is that a 2x? It's a 2x, but it's a negative 2x. So that means I have the right number, just the wrong sign, right? Which would imply that I have the right numbers, just the wrong signs. So all I'm going to do is change the minus 4 to a plus 4 and change that positive 6 to a negative 6, and that is the pair of numbers that I want. That is the pair of numbers that I'm looking for on step 2. I'm thinking of the multiples of negative 24 that combine together to give me the b value negative 2. And that, how could I get negative 24? A negative 6 times 4, that'll give me a negative 24. And if I combine them, it will give me the b value negative 2. So that was step 2. Step 3. And you know what? Let's go to step 3 right here and say, actually, no, let's not say anything. We'll just highlight certain things right here on step 3. It says rewrite your b, and it should be your bx. So everybody put a bx right there. Rewrite your bx term as those two numbers from step 2, thus changing your trinomial to a polynomial. So step 3, what are we really doing here? We are changing a trinomial, again, changing a trinomial to a 4-term polynomial. How do we change a trinomial to a 4-term polynomial? We take the bx term, the middle term, and rewrite it as the two numbers from step 2. So check it out. I originally had a trinomial, 1, 2, 3. And I'm going to change it. Here's step 3. Step 3. I'm going to change it to a 4-term polynomial. How? By replacing the bx term, the negative 2x term, to become these two numbers with x's. Okay? So this bx term, the negative 2x, I'm going to rewrite it as negative, actually positive 4x and negative 6. Okay, so I'm going to rewrite the whole thing. X squared, it says x squared. Let's start with x squared. And instead of negative 2x, I'm going to rewrite it as a positive 4x minus 6x. Positive 4x minus 6x. And then we have the minus 24 at the very end. We're going to have a minus 24 at the very end. Are you with me? That is step 3. You rewrite your bx term, that middle term, you rewrite it as the two numbers from step 2, thus changing your trinomial to a 4-term polynomial. Now you're probably thinking, why the heck would I want to change a trinomial into a 4-term polynomial? That looks even harder. It looks crazier. The truth is because last week we already learned how to factor by grouping, and that's with 4 terms. So that's what we're going to apply right here. Our 4th step, if you look at our 4th step up here, it says factoring by grouping. And if you forgot that from last week, step 1 is separated into 2 groups. Step 2, factor each group. Step 3, pull out that common binomial, right? So let's do that with these 4 terms. So you're going to separate it into 2 groups. And then from there, you're going to factor something out of the first group, and you're going to factor something out of the second group. Out of that first group, what could I pull out? An x. So if you pull out an x, what would be left on the inside? X times what gets you back to x squared? Yep, an x and a plus 4. That's right. Now over here, what could I pull out of this group? A negative 6 is the best option. So let's pull out that negative 6. What would be left on the inside? X plus 4, right? Because negative 6 times x gets you back to there. That times that gets you back to there. Okay, and now we could see that we do have a common binomial in both first group and second group, and I could pull out that common binomial. So you have that common binomial, x plus 4, and you have some exaggerated parentheses here. So if I do pull out the x plus 4 and the x plus 4, if I pull them out, the only things left over will be an x and a minus 6. X right here, minus 6 right there. And that is your factored form answer to the whole thing. Of course, just rewrite it with the correct size parentheses. X plus 4 times x minus 6. What is factoring? It's a reverse distributive property. It's like if I gave you the answer, and he came up with the distributive property question. So if you wanted to double check and see if you actually did this all, what you could do is just actually distribute and see if it gives you what you originally started with. You don't have to do this, but just let me verify this to you. Let me prove it to you. And I want to do this in yellow because you don't have to do this, right? X times x, x squared. X times -6, -6x. Positive 4 times x, positive 4x. Positive 4 times -6, -24. If you combine the middle two terms, you're going to get x squared minus 2x minus 24. And as you could see, that is what we originally started with, x squared minus 2x minus 24. Again, this part right here in yellow, this was just done to double check my answer. This is the correct factored form answer, okay? It's a lot of steps. It's a long process. And I know some of us may already know the shortcut. There will be a shortcut tomorrow. And you're going to be like, what the heck? Why did you show us this long process? But the reality is we're going to get to some really complicated quadratic trinomials in the future. And if you understand this long method right now, it'll be a lot easier in the future. All right. So I just did that one. You guys followed along. Well, at least I hope you followed along. Let's do this one together. Okay. So I'm going to be asking for your help here. And you're going to need a lot of space. So I would maybe put a line right here. And again, on this first day, I want you to show every single one of your steps. So write down step 1. And what is step 1? Help me. A times C. Okay, write down A times C, even though you already know that it's A times C. Go ahead and write it down. 1 is A times C. And what is A times C? 36, right? And you might even be thinking, why the heck am I going to do this first step if this is a 1? It's always going to be this number. Yeah, just bear with me. Show each step. Step 1, A times C gives me 36. Step 2, let's all write this down. Step 2, write down, make a list of multiples of that number 36. Right? Make a list of multiples of that number 36. Okay? So I always say start with the number 1. 1 times what gives you 36? That's right. 2 times what gives you 36? 18. Now let's say you're struggling with multiplication. You could always get your calculator and type in 36 divided by 2, and the answer will be 18. So like let's say you didn't know your multiplication table is a 3. You could say 36 divided by 3, and the calculator will tell you 12. Right? 3 times 12 is 36. But a lot of us know our multiplication table. So what is 4 times what will give me 36? 4 times 9 gives me 36. 5 times something give me 36? Anybody? 5 times something give me 36? No, right? Okay. And if you tried it on the calculator, 36 divided by 5, it's not going to work out. It's going to be a decimal or a fraction. So 5 didn't work. How about 6? 6 times something give you 36? Yeah, 6 times 6. And that's it, right? That's all there is. I mean, if you kept going, 7 times something, 8 times something, it's not going to work. If you get to 9 times something, you're already back to 4 times 9. You already have it represented there. So these are all the possible multiplications problems to get to 36. Now, step 2, it's not just making a list of multiples. You also have to find the pair of numbers that combines together to give you the middle value, in this case, -13. So if I add these guys, 36 plus 1, that's 37. Is that a plus 37x? No. So that's not it. How about 2 and 18? Combine those. What's 2 plus 18? 20. Is that a positive 20x? No. Then you move on. 3 and 12. What's 3 plus 12? 15. Is that a 15? No. 4 plus 9. 13. Is that a 13? Yes, but it's a -13. And when I add 4 and 9, that gives me a positive 13. But in reality, I want a -13. So I have the right number, just the wrong sign, which implies that I have the right numbers, just the wrong signs. So instead of 4 and 9, we need to change those signs to a -4 and a -9. -4 and -9. That's a correct combo. So step 3 is to rewrite your trinomial as a 4-term polynomial. And here it is, x squared. But instead of the -13x, we're going to rewrite it as the -4x minus 9x. And of course, at the very end, you have the plus 36. So put the plus 36 there. And why do we want to change this trinomial to a 4-term polynomial? So we could actually factor by grouping. So we could zoom in on this, and we could factor by grouping. Step 1 is to create your 2 groups. So you have x squared minus 4x space minus 9x plus 36. Second step in factoring by grouping is factor something out of each group. Right here in the first group, what could I pull out? X. What would be left over on the inside? X times what gets you back to x squared? X. Whoops. And what time x times what gets you back to a negative 4x? Negative 4. What could I pull out of the second group? A negative 9. So let's pull out that negative 9, and you will have an x minus 4 left over on the inside. And step 3 in factoring by grouping is to take a step back, recognize that you have 2 of those common binomials that could be pulled out. So I always draw some exaggerated parentheses. I pull out that common binomial, and you have to have parentheses around it. I even keep them red and keep it blue. There's that x minus 4 and that x minus 4. You pulled it out. So what's left over? An x and a minus 9. So x and minus 9. So there's your factored form. X minus 4, x minus 9. If you're second guessing yourself and you're like, man, I probably made a mistake in all these steps, you could distribute x times x, get x squared, x times negative 9, negative 4 times x, negative 4 times negative 9. Combine the middle terms, and you should get the original quadratic trinomial that you started with. So if you understand those 2 examples that I've done, I want you guys to try it right now. I want to pause it, and then I'll explain it once you guys are done. Okay, so once again, ladies and gentlemen, let's show all our work, write down all the steps. Step 1, multiply a times c. You're going to get 1 times negative 32. You're going to get negative 32. That is your answer for step 1. Step 2, think of the multiples of negative 32. So make a list, right? You're going to start with negative 1 times 32. Negative 2 times 16. Negative 3 times, it doesn't work. Negative 4 times 8. And that's it. If you tried negative 5, it doesn't work. Negative 6, it doesn't work. Negative 7 doesn't work. If you get to negative 8, you're back to the 8 times 4. So this is all the combos that work. There's only 3 possible options. So out of the 3 possible options, which combo, when you combine them, not multiply them anymore, when you combine them, give you the middle value, negative 4x? Well, if I combine 32 take away 1, that gives me a 31. That's not a 31x. If I combine 16 and negative 2, that's 14. That's not a plus 14x. If I combine negative 4 and 8, that gives me a positive 4. That is a 4, but it's a negative 4, not a positive 4. So I have the right numbers, just the wrong signs. Now, you're not going to have to always change signs. Sometimes it'll be ready to go. Like if this would have been a positive 4x, then I would use these exact numbers. But because it's a negative 4x, I don't have to change the minus 4 to a plus 4 and change that positive 8 to a negative 8. And this is the correct pair of numbers that I want for step 2. Now we move on to step 3. Step 3 is changing your trinomial, 3 terms, into a 4-term polynomial. And how's that? By rewriting your middle value, the bx term, the negative 4x, you're going to rewrite it as a positive 4x minus 8x. Okay? So let me actually show that to you. You have x squared, and instead of the minus 4x, we're going to write plus 4x minus 8x. Plus 4x minus 8x. Okay? And then at the very end, you have the minus 32. So at the very end, you have the minus 32. Okay? Again, we're just changing this negative 4x to a positive 4x and a negative 8x, because at the end of it all, if I did add 4x plus negative 8x, it'll get me back to that negative 4x. So why the heck would I want to change 3 terms into 4 terms so I could factor by grouping? Now, I kind of left some space between right there, so I could just focus in on that and say, what could I pull out of the first group? What could I pull out? An x. What would be left over on the inside? X plus 4. What could I pull out of the second group with this negative 8? Oh, with this negative 8x and that negative 32, what could I pull out? a negative 8. And what would be left on the inside? X plus 4 as well, which is beautiful because now we could actually pull out this common binomial that's in the red parentheses, the blue binomial x plus 4, we could pull that out. And you keep them in parentheses, x plus 4. You pull them out. So what's left? X minus 8. So you have x, you have minus 8. So with the correct size parentheses, your final factored form answer is x plus 4 times x minus 8. What do you think? It's a long process. Is it difficult? Not if you've been paying attention, not if you've been following along. If you've been asleep, daydreaming, or something else, this is going to be crazy. It's going to be hard. You're not going to pass this section. But if you've been paying attention and you've been following along, it should be easy. So because it's such a long process, if you flip the paper over, you get to this worksheet. And today, all I want you to do, and you have plenty of time right now in class to finish this assignment, all I want you to do for today is to do 1 through 5. Now, the problem here is that this worksheet, there's not enough space right here. So I recommend opening up your notebook, copying this guy over in your notebook, and going through all those steps that are on the other side on your notes, okay? So on every single one of these, I don't know, which one do you want me to do? 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5? Pick one. 3? All right, so let me do number 3. And again, since there's not enough space, I'm going to rewrite this on the side in my notebook. Pretend that that's my notebook. Anyway, even though you know what to do, I want you to actually write down and number your steps. Step 1, A times C. So that's a 1 times 20. That's 20. Box it in. Step 2, list of multiples. Even though you already know that you're going to make a list of multiples, go ahead and write down step 2 and write down list of multiples of that answer 20. So you go 1 times 20, 2 times 10, 3 times doesn't work, 4 times 5. And there's your list, because if you go to the next number 5, it's 5 times 4, and that's already represented right there with 4 and 5. Now, the question is, which of these pair of numbers, when I combine them, gives me the middle value 9x, or in this case, 9p? Well, 20 plus 1 is 21. That's not a 21. 2 plus 10 is 12. That's not a 12. 4 plus 5 is what? 9. And that is a 9. So what pair of numbers is the answer for step 2? This pair of numbers. And you don't change anything, right? Because a positive 4 plus a positive 5 is that positive 9. Now, if this would have been a minus 9, then yeah, I would change that to a negative 4 and a negative 5. But it's already ready to go. Then we can move on to step 3. Step 3 is to change your trinomial, 1, 2, 3, to a 4-term polynomial by replacing your bx term, or in this case, the middle term, 9p. You're going to replace it to become 4p plus 5p. Okay, so let's actually do that. It's p squared, but instead of plus 9p, I'm going to put plus 4p plus 5p. And then at the very end, plus 20. At the very end, plus 20. So all we did was change the middle term to the 2 terms from step 2 and putting a p on those guys. And then we could now, whoops, what happened there? We could now factor by grouping. So to factor by grouping, you're going to factor something out of the first group, factor something out of the second group. On that first group, what could I pull out? What could I pull out? P. What would be left over on the inside? P times what gets you back to that? P times what gets you back to that? P plus 4. Thank you. And in the second group, what could I pull out? 5. Positive 5. What would be left over on the inside? P plus 4 also. That's a good thing, because now we could factor out that common binomial, that blue P plus 4. And what would be left over in the exaggerated parentheses? A P plus 5. And ladies and gentlemen, there is your answer. But all you got to do is write it with the correct size parentheses. So the answer to number 3 would be P plus 4 times P plus 5. Work on the rest of this, get it done, And tomorrow I'll show you a shortcut and you're going to hate me, but it's okay.